Welcome back, page 34 of Lord of the Flies. Jack stood there, streaming with sweat, streaked with brown earth, stained by all the vicissitudes of the day's hunting, swearing he turned off the trail and pushed his way through until the forest opened a little. Instead of bald trunks supporting a dark roof, there were light gray trunks and crowns of feathery palm. Beyond these was the glitter of the sea, and he could hear voices. Ralph was standing by a contraption of palm trunks and leaves, a rude shelter that faced the lagoon and seemed very near to falling down. He did not notice when Jack spoke. "Got any water?" Ralph looked up, frowning from the complication of leaves. He did not notice Jack even when he saw him. "I said, you got any water? I'm thirsty." Ralph withdrew his attention from the shelter and realized Jack with a start. "Oh, hello. Water? There by the tree. Ought to be some left." Jack took a coconut shell that brimmed with fresh water from among a group that was arranged in the shade and drank. The water splashed over his chin and neck and chest. He breathed noisily when he had finished. "Needed that." Simon spoke from inside the shelter. "Up a bit." Ralph turned to the shelter and lifted a branch with a whole tiling of leaves. The leaves came apart and fluttered down. Simon's contrite face appeared in the hole. "Sorry." Ralph surveyed the wreck with distaste. "Never get it done." He flung himself down at Jack's feet. Simon remained looking out the hole in the shelter. Once down, Ralph explained, "Been working for days now, and look." Two shelters were in position, but shaky. This one was a ruin. "And they keep running off. You remember the meeting, how everyone was going to work hard until the shelters were finished? Yeah, Piggy's idea. Like, they never listened to him, and he's got all the brains of the group. Except me and my hunters. Except the hunters. Well, the little ones are," he gesticulated, sought for a word. "They're hopeless. The older ones aren't much better. Do you see? All day I've been working with Simon, no one else. They're off bathing or eating or playing." Simon poked his head out carefully. "You're chief. You tell 'em off." Ralph lay flat and looked up at the palm trees and the sky. "Meetings. Don't we love meetings? Ugh. Every day, twice a day we talk. We got on one elbow. He got on one elbow. I bet if I blew the conch to this minute, they'd come running. Then we'd be, very solemn, and someone would say, 'We ought to build a jet or a submarine or a TV set.' When the meeting was over, they'd work for 5 minutes, then wander off or go hunting." Jack flushed. "We want meat." "Well, we haven't got any yet. And we want shelters. Besides, the rest of your hunters came back hours ago. They've been swimming." "I went on," said Jack. "I let them go. I had to go on. He tried to convey the compulsion to track down and kill that was swallowing him up. "I went on. I thought by myself." The madness came into his eyes again. "I thought I might kill." "But you didn't." "I thought I might." Some hidden passion vibrated in Jack's voice. "But you haven't yet." His invitation might have passed as casual were it not for the undertone. "You wouldn't care to help with the shelters, I suppose. We want meat, and we don't get it." Now the antagonism was audible. So, Maurice was an antagonist to Holden. That's antagonist as a noun. I have antagonism toward Emily. That's a verb. "But I shall next time. I've got to get a barb on the spear. We wounded a pig, and the spear fell out. If we could only make barbs. We need shelters." Suddenly Jack shouted in rage. "Are you accusing?" "All I'm saying is we've worked dashed hard. That's all." They were both red in the face and found looking at each other difficult. Ralph rolled on his stomach and began to play with the grass. "If it rains like when we dropped in, we'll need shelters, all right? And then another thing. We need shelters because of the..." He paused for a moment, and they both pushed their anger away. Then he went on with the safe, changed subject. "You've noticed, haven't you?" Jack put down a spear and squatted. "Noticed what?" "Well, they're frightened." He rolled over and peered into Jack's fierce, dirty face. "I mean, the way things are, they dream. You can hear them. Have you ever been awake at night?" Jack shook his head. They talk and scream, the little ones, even some of the others, as if it wasn't a good island. Astonished to the interruption, they looked up at Simon's serious face. As if, said Simon, the beastie or the snake thing was real, remember? The two older boys flinched when they heard the shameful syllable. Snakes were not mentioned now, were not mentionable. As if this wasn't a good island? Ralph said slowly. Yes, that's right. Jack sat up and stretched out his legs. They're batty. Crackers. Remember when we went exploring? They grinned at each other, remembering the glamour of the first day. Ralph went on. So we need shelters as a sort of home. That's right. Jack drew up his legs, clasped his knees, and frowned in an effort to attain clarity. This would be scary, guys. No, there's no protection. Wild boars are dangerous. It's hotter than a firecracker all day. You're sunburned. When the sun goes down, it's complete darkness. You have no control of the fire, or if you can even start one, because you got to use the sun and Piggy's glasses.
And he literally has this, like, a peeling sunburn. You know how bad that probably feels?
Oh, yeah. And they're so dehydrated, their lips are cracked and probably bleeding. They're arguing. The kids are crying and having nightmares. Like, dude, it sounds fun at first, but it don't sound fun anymore. Jack drew up his clasped his. All the same in the forest. I mean, when you're hunting, not when you're getting fruit, of course, but when you're on your own. He paused for a moment, not sure if Ralph would take him seriously. Go on. If you're hunting sometimes, you catch yourself feeling as if, he flushed suddenly. There's nothing in it, of course, just a feeling, but you can feel as if you're not hunting, but being hunted. As if something's behind you all the time in the jungle. They were silent again, Simon intent, Ralph incredulous, and faintly indignant. He sat up, rubbing one shoulder with a dirty hand. Well, I don't know. Jack leapt to his feet and spoke very quickly. That's how you can feel in the forest. Of course, there's nothing in it, only... He took a few rapid steps toward the beach, then came back. Only I know how they feel, see? That's all. The best thing we can do is get ourselves rescued. Jack had to think for a moment before he could remember what rescue was. Rescue. Yes, of course, all the same. I'd like to catch a pig first. He snatched up his spear, dashed it into the ground. The opaque, mad look came into his eyes again. Ralph looked at him critically through this tangle of fair hair. So long as your hunters remember the fire. You and your fire. The two boys trotted down the beach and, turning at the water's edge, looked back at the pink mountain. The trickle of smoke sketched a chalky line up the solid blue of the sky, wavered high up and faded. Ralph frowned. I wonder how far off you could see that. Miles. We don't make enough smoke. The bottom part of the trickle, as though conscious of their gaze, thickened to a creamy blur which crept up the feeble column. They put a green branches, muttered Ralph. I wonder. He screwed up his eyes and swung round to search the horizon. Got it. Jack shouted so loudly that Ralph jumped. What? Where? Is it a ship? But Jack was pointing to the high declivities that led down the mountain to the flatter part of the island. Of course, they'll lie up there. They must. When the sun's too hot. Ralph gazed bewildered at his rapt face. They get up high up and in the shade, resting during the heat, like cows at home. I thought you saw a ship. We could steal up on one, paint our face so they wouldn't see, perhaps surround them, and then... Indignation took away Ralph's control. I was talking about smoke. Don't you want to be rescued? All you can talk about is pig, pig, pig. But we want meat. And I work all day with nothing but Simon, and you come back and don't even notice the huts. I was working too. But you like it, shouted Ralph. You want to hunt while I... They faced each other on the bright beach, astonished at the rub of feeling. Ralph looked away first, pretending interest in a group of little ones on the sand. From beyond the platform came the shouting of the hunters in the swimming pool. On the end of the platform, Piggy was lying flat, looking down at the brilliant water. People don't help much. He wanted to explain how people were never quite what you thought they were. I want to remember that one. Simon, he helps. He pointed at the shelters. All the rest rushed off. He's done as much as I have, only Simon's always about. Ralph started back to the shelters with Jack by his side. Do a bit for you, muttered Jack, before I have a bath. Don't bother. But when they reached the shelter, Simon was not to be seen. Ralph put his head in the hole, withdrew it, and turned to Jack. "He's buzzed off." "Got fed up," said Jack, "and gone for a bath." Ralph frowned. "He's queer. He's funny." So queer, this is one of the reasons this book has been banned so many times, is that back in the 1940s, people didn't want people talking about being LGBTQ plus. And there were even people that would like say you're going to hell and need conversion therapy. And that even happens not too long ago.
Yeah, that even still happens today.
And Golding uses words like queer. So in this context, he's saying kind of awkwardly a different type of dude. But in the 1940s, queer still meant LGBTQ plus. So therefore, if I felt like that, I'm going to ban this sucker because he said the word queer, even though that's not how he meant it. And there's rumors about his sexuality, by the way. If you want to Google, was William Golding sexual? What was his sexual preference? If you care. And I didn't mark my spot, of course. "He's queer, he's funny." Jack nodded as much for the sake of agreeing as anything, and by tacit consent, they left the shelter and went toward the bathing pool. "And then," said Jack, "when I've had a bath and something to eat, I'll just trek over to the other side of the mountain and see if I can see any traces coming. But the sun's nearly set. I might have time." They walked along, two continents of experience and feeling, unable to communicate. "If I could only get a pig, I'll come back and go on with the shelter." They looked at each other, baffled, in love and hate. All the in love and hate, just to say the word in love, two guys that are always naked. All the warm salt water of the bathing pool and the shouting and splashing and laughing were only just sufficient to bring them together again. Simon was not in the bathing pool as they had expected. When the other two had trotted down the beach to look back at the mountain, he had followed them for a few yards and then stopped. He had stood frowning down at the pile of sand on the beach where somebody had been trying to build a little house or hut. Then he turned his back on this and walked into the forest with an air of purpose. He was a small, skinny boy, his chin pointed, and his eyes so bright they had deceived Ralph into thinking him delightfully gay and wicked. So gay and wicked, and then to use those words together. So gay, he's happy. He's jovial. He's, like Santa Claus. He's a gay old elf. But it was also meant other things too. So we need to ban this book. We can't have teenagers reading something like this. The coarse mop of black hair was long and swung down, almost concealing a low, broad forehead. He wore the remains of shorts, and his feet were bare like Jack. Always darkish in color, Simon was burned by the sun to a deep tan that glistened with sweat. He picked his way up the scar, past the great rock where Ralph had climbed on the first meeting, then turned off to his right among the trees. He walked with an accustomed tread through the acres of fruit trees, where the least energetic could find an easy, if unsatisfying meal. Flower and fruit grew together on the same tree, and everywhere was the scent of ripeness and the booming of a million bees at pasture. Here the little ones who had run after him caught up with him. They talked, cried out unintelligibly, lugged him toward the trees. Then, amid the roar of bees in the afternoon sunlight, Simon found for them the fruit that they could not reach, pulled off the choicest from up in the foliage, passed them back down to the endless outstretched hands. When he had satisfied them, he paused and looked round. The little ones watched him inscrutably over double handfuls of ripe fruit. Simon turned away from them and went where the just perceptible path led him. Soon, high jungle closed in. Tall trunks bore unexpected pale flowers all the way up to the dark canopy where life went on clamorously. The air here was dark, too, and the creepers dropped their ropes like the rigging of foundered ships. His feet left prints in the soft soil, and the creepers shivered throughout their lengths when he bumped them. This is the most beautiful writing about a kid taking a poop in the woods I've ever read. He came at last to a place where more sunshine fell. Since they had not so far to go for light, the creepers had woven a great mat that hung at the side of an open space in the jungle. For here a patch of rock came close to the surface and would not allow more than little plants and ferns to grow. The whole space was walled with dark aromatic bushes, and it was a bowl of heat and light. A great tree fallen across one corner leaned against the trees that still stood, and a rapid climber flaunted red and yellow sprays right to the top. Simon paused. He looked over his shoulder as Jack had done at the clothes ways behind him and glanced swiftly round to confirm that he was utterly alone. For a moment, his movements were almost furtive. Then he bent down and wormed his way into the center of the mat. The creepers and the bushes were so close that he left his sweat on them, and they pulled together behind him. When he was secure in the middle, he was a little cabin screened off from the open space by a few leaves. He squatted down, parted the leaves, looked out into the clearing. Nothing moved but a pair of gaudy butterflies that danced round each other in the hot air. Holding his breath, he cocked a critical ear at the sounds of the island. Evening was advancing toward the island. The sounds of the bright, fantastic birds, the bee sounds, even the crying of the gulls that were returning to their roosts among the square rocks were fainter. The deep sea breaking miles away on the reef and made an undertone less perceptible than the susurration of the blood. Simon dropped the screen of leaves back into place. The slope of the bars of honey-colored sunlight decreased. They slid up the branches, passed over the green candle-like buds, moved up toward the canopy, and darkness thickened under the trees. With the fading of the light, the riotous colors died, and the heat and urgency cooled away. The candle buds stirred. Their green sepals drew back a little, and the white tips of flowers rose delicately to meet the open air. Now the sunlight had lifted clear of the open space and withdrawn from the sky. Darkness poured out, submerging the ways between the trees till they were dim and strange as the bottom of the sea. The candle buds opened their wide white flowers, glimmering under the light that pricked down from the first stars. Their scent spilled out into the air and took possession of the island. Painted faces and long hair. Would you guys have gotten that poop part?
That was so beautiful.
And see, that's another, and that's kind of like how Shakespeare hid the meaning of being critical of Queen Elizabeth I by saying, oh, that play was in Italy. So you know those Italian people, you know how they are. So I'm going to hide my criticism of you, Queen, by making my play be in Verona, Italy, for example. Another way of being gross in the 1940s, or making comments about sexuality in the 1940s, you have to hide it.
Dude, that didn't even sound gross. Like, I didn't even know what you were talking about until, like, I started listening.
Yeah, the whole squatted down and stuff, and made sure he was utterly alone, and he concentrated. Like the first painted faces and long hair. The first rhythm that they became used to was the slow swing from dawn to quick dusk. They accepted the pleasures of morning, the bright sun, the whelming sea, and sweet air, as a time when play was good and life so full that hope was not necessary and therefore forgotten. Toward noon, as the flood of light fell more nearly to the perpendicular, the stark colors of the morning were smoothed in, pearl and opalescence, and the heat, as though the impending sun's height gave it momentum, became a blow that they ducked, running to the shade and lying there, perhaps even sleeping. Strange things happened at midday. The glittering sea rose up, moved apart in plains of blatant impossibility. The coral reef and the few stunted palms that clung to the more elevated parts would float up into the sky, would quiver, be plucked apart, run like raindrops on a wire, or be repeated as in an odd succession of mirrors. Sometimes land loomed where there was no land and flicked out like a bubble as the children watched. Piggy discounted all this learnedly as a mirage. And since no boy could reach even the reef over the stretch of water where the snapping sharks waited, they grew accustomed to these mysteries and ignored them, just as they ignored the miraculous, throbbing stars. At midday, the illusions emerged into the sky, and the sun gazed down like an angry eye. Then, at the end of the afternoon, the mirage subsided and the horizon became level and blue and clipped as the sun declined. That was another time of comparative coolness, but menaced by the coming of the dark. When the sun sank, darkness dropped on the island like an extinguisher, and soon the shelters were full of restlessness under the remote stars. Nevertheless, the Northern European tradition of work, play, and food right through the day made it impossible for them to adjust themselves wholly to this new rhythm. The little one, Percival, had early crawled into a shelter and stayed there for 2 days, talking, singing, and crying, till they thought him batty and were faintly amused. Ever since then, he had been peaked, red-eyed, and miserable, a little one who played little and cried often. We have not heard Percival yet. We'll see you tomorrow.